Think of the people who most changed your life, your career, your faith, a relationship that truly mattered, an idea that reoriented the direction of years. Now think about how those people entered your life. Was it through a planned meeting, a carefully arranged introduction, an event you went to specifically to find that connection? Almost certainly not. Almost certainly, it was a conversation that shouldn't have happened in a situation you almost didn't go to, with a person who had no obvious reason to be in your trajectory at that moment. A person who arrived from an angle you weren't monitoring, and who changed something that your most careful plans had failed to move. This is not an accident. It is a pattern. And it has a name in sociology, in neuroscience, and in the theological tradition that understood this pattern long before social scientists had the language to document it. In this video, I will show you why the most transformative encounters of your life rarely arrive through the channels you are watching, what the scriptures call the posture that makes you available to receive them when they arrive, and the specific error that causes many people to miss the encounter that could have changed everything without realizing what was happening. And there is a scene in the New Testament that I will present from an angle you have probably never heard, and which is, for me, the most precise description of how an unplanned encounter becomes the turning point of an entire life. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. Subscribe and turn on the bell. Let's start with the data that should most disturb anyone who spends significant time planning connections and building networks. In 1973, sociologist Mark Granovetter published what would become one of the most cited articles in the history of sociology, The Strength of Weak Ties. The central thesis, confirmed by decades of replications and extensions, is counterintuitive to the point of appearing wrong on first reading.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.
The connections that most frequently produce transformative opportunities, jobs, partnerships, information that changes trajectories, do not come from your strong ties. They do not come from your close friends, your family members, the people with whom you have frequent contact and with whom you share a life context. They come from your weak ties, from distant acquaintances, occasional contacts, people who are in different social networks than yours and who therefore carry information, perspective, and connection that your strong ties, by definition, do not have access to. Researchers from UFRGS, who study social network dynamics and professional mobility in Brazil, replicated Granovetter's findings in a Brazilian context and identified the same pattern with a relevant addition: the Brazilian cultural resistance to cold contact. The difficulty of opening up to connections with people outside the established circle significantly reduces exposure to weak ties and consequently to the transformative opportunities those ties carry. People who reported greater openness to unexpected connections, who spoke to strangers, who responded to unusual invitations, who frequented environments outside their habitual territory, demonstrated significantly higher network mobility and reported more experiences of encounters they described as trajectory changes. The journal Psychological Science published research on the phenomenon that researchers call structural serendipity, the observation that apparently casual encounters that produce transformative consequences are rarely completely random. They occur with greater frequency in people who maintain what researchers describe as a posture of active openness. The combination of exposure to varied contexts, attention to the unexpected, and a willingness to pause and deepen connections that the habitual script would discard as irrelevant. Serendipity is not luck distributed equally. It is a partial product of the posture of those who are available to receive it. And here is where the scriptures, centuries before Granovetter and social network researchers, describe this pattern with a word that carries a semantic precision that no translation can fully deliver. The word in Hebrew is hine, usually translated as behold or and behold, one of those words that appear in italics in older Bibles and that most readers pass over without stopping. But hine is one of the most important narrative markers in all of biblical literature. It is not a simple adverb of presence, it is a warning sign, an instruction to the reader and the character that something decisive is about to happen, that the scene that follows deserves total attention, that the ordinary is about to be interrupted by the extraordinary. Almost all transformative encounters in the biblical narrative are preceded by hine. Abraham sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day, and hine, 3 visitors arrive. Moses tending Jethro's flock in the desert, and hine, a bush that burns without being consumed. The angel who appears to Gideon, hine. The angel who finds Elijah under the broom tree, hine. Gabriel arriving to Mary, hine. The text uses hine to signal that a portal of encounter is opening, not in a pseudo-scientific sense, but in a real narrative sense. Pay attention. What is happening now has weight and direction that go beyond the surface. What is theologically significant about hine is that it rarely precedes the encounters the characters were planning. It precedes the encounters that arrived from where they were not looking. Abraham was not expecting visitors in that heat. Moses had not gone to the desert to look for a vision. Gideon was hiding, not in a position to receive a call. The biblical hine consistently occurs at the intersection between the ordinary and the unexpected. And what distinguishes those who receive what the encounter carries is the ability to recognize the hine when it happens. You have probably already had hine moments in your life, encounters that at the time seemed circumstantial, conversations you almost didn't have, situations that the habitual script would have discarded as irrelevant, and which, looking back, revealed themselves to have been real turning points. The question is not whether hine moments happen, it is whether you were available to recognize them when they arrived. Click the like button now if you recognize at least one hine in your trajectory, an encounter that was not in your plans and that changed something your plans were not changing. This recognition is the beginning of the posture that opens space for the next one. But now I need to introduce the character I promised at the beginning, and I will present him from an angle that completely transforms the habitual reading of this story. The name is Zacchaeus. Most people know Zacchaeus for his social position, tax collector, wealthy, considered a public sinner by the community, and for his height, small of stature. And it is exactly this apparently trivial physical characteristic that is the key to the entire narrative. Jesus was passing through Jericho. The text of Luke 19 says there was a crowd. Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was, but could not because of the crowd and his stature. And so he did something that, for a man of his social position, was objectively humiliating. He ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree so he could see from above. Pause here and observe what is being described. A wealthy man in a position of fiscal authority, with social status, even if negative, that anyone in the 1st century Middle East would have considered his only real social possession, runs and climbs a tree like a child. There is no dignity in this. There is no social strategy. There is only the genuine desire to see, regardless of the cost to his image. And it was precisely the position that his weakness led him to occupy, the tree, the high point he only reached because he admitted he needed help to see, that made him visible to Jesus in a way that the crowd at ground level was not. Jesus arrives under the sycamore tree, looks up and says, "Zacchaeus, come down quickly, for today I must stay at your house." And the text records that Zacchaeus came down quickly and received him with joy. There are 4 elements in this scene that deserve careful attention. The first, Jesus used Zacchaeus' name. Not, "Hey, you in the tree," not that man there. The name. In a time and culture where name and identity were inseparable, where being called by name by someone was to be recognized in your specificity, not treated as part of the mass. This was an act of radical visibility. Zacchaeus was not just seen, he was known. The second, the initiative was completely Jesus's. Zacchaeus did not ask for an audience. He did not introduce himself. He did not articulate his need. He was in a tree trying to see from afar. And the encounter came to him, not from the angle that any of his planning could have anticipated. The third, the instruction was one of urgency. Come down quickly, not come down when you are ready, not think carefully before coming down. The window of the encounter demanded a present response, not prolonged deliberation. And the text records that Zacchaeus responded with the same urgency. He came down quickly. The fourth, the transformation that followed the encounter was complete and specific. Zacchaeus did not just receive Jesus. He immediately declared, "Half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold." There was no sermon from Jesus about Zacchaeus' sins. There was no explicit call to repentance. The encounter itself produced the clarity that years of accumulating wealth and social position had not produced. What Zacchaeus discovered in the sycamore tree, what the posture of genuine humility of climbing a tree, because he wanted to see more than he protected his image, was the condition that made the encounter possible. He was available. And availability does not mean passivity. It means being in the right place with the right posture, regardless of the cost to the image that the place and posture imply. There is a word in Hebrew that captures Zacchaeus' posture with a precision that English cannot deliver in a single term. The word is anava, usually translated as humility, gentleness, or meekness. But the Hebrew semantics are more muscular than this translation suggests. Anava is not passivity or self-annihilation. The Hebrew root describes intentional bending, the position of one who chooses to lower themselves, not out of weakness but out of clarity, about what matters more than their own image. It is the posture of one who knows that seeing is more important than being seen, that receiving is more important than appearing to need nothing. Moses is described in the book of Numbers with the word anav, the adjectival form of the same root, as the most humble of all the men who were on the face of the earth. And Moses was the leader of an entire people, the direct interlocutor with God, the man who had confronted Pharaoh. Anava is not weakness disguised as virtue. It is the posture of the man or woman of power who chooses to remain open, remain receptive, remain available for what was not in the plans, because they understand that what was not in the plans frequently carries what the plans could not deliver. Zacchaeus in the tree was anava in action. He gave up everything his social position demanded he protect: dignity, image, the respect of peers, because the desire to see was stronger than the cost of being seen in a vulnerable position. And it was precisely this posture that made the encounter possible. The Institute of Noetic Sciences published research on receptivity and states of cognitive openness that documents a pattern corresponding neurologically to what the scriptures describe with the vocabulary of anava. Individuals in states of high cognitive openness, characterized by low defensiveness, high tolerance for ambiguity, and a willingness to process information from unexpected sources, demonstrated significantly greater ability to identify and seize opportunities that arrived from unanticipated angles. Openness was not just a philosophical attitude, it produced measurable results in opportunity capture. The opposite of anava is not arrogance in the moral sense. It is closure, the rigidity of the system that only processes what it already expected to receive, that only recognizes the encounter that was already in the script, that discards as irrelevant any connection that did not arrive through the channel being monitored. And it is this closure that causes most people to miss their hine moments without recognizing them. There is a second story in the book of Acts that illuminates another dimension of the pattern we are describing, and that expands what Zacchaeus teaches us about individual availability into something even broader. The story of Philip and the Ethiopian in Acts 8 begins with an instruction that seems completely nonsensical from the standpoint of strategic logic. an angel tells Philip to go to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza, which is desert. The text takes care to record this detail: the desert road. Philip is in Samaria, where a revival was in full swing. People being healed, crowds responding, visible and measurable impact. And the instruction is, leave all that and go to an empty road. And Philip goes. Without questioning, without negotiating, without asking for additional confirmation, Philip's anava is in the willingness to leave the context of high visibility and go to the empty road because the instruction pointed there. On the other side of the encounter, there was an Ethiopian eunuch, a high-ranking official administrator of the treasury of the Queen of Ethiopia, who had gone to Jerusalem to worship and was returning, sitting in his chariot, reading the book of Isaiah. And he was reading chapter 53, the text of the suffering servant, and he did not understand. The text records that he was reading aloud, as was the custom of the time. The Spirit says to Philip, "Go near and join yourself to this chariot." And the Greek verb is kolao, which describes the action of adhering, of joining firmly, of gluing oneself to something. Not pass nearby, not observe from afar to see if it is convenient. Join yourself. Adhere. And Philip ran. The text uses the verb to run. He did not walk, he did not approach carefully. He ran, and he asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" The question was direct, without beating around the bush, without the social hesitation that would make most people think twice before approaching the chariot of a high-level foreign official to ask if he understands what he is reading. The Ethiopian replied, "How can I unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Two simultaneous movements, prepared in parallel, converging on a road that the strategic eyes of any planner would have discarded as the wrong place. One man being led to an empty road, another man making a journey from Ethiopia to Jerusalem and returning without the understanding he had sought, until that specific road. One reading aloud a passage he did not understand, the other arriving running with the exact interpretation that was missing. Pagash, pagash. The Hebrew word for encounter that carries the weight of intention and meaning, not the casual encounter of daily life, but the encounter that happens with a precision that transcends the planning of any of the parties involved. The Ethiopian was baptized on that road, went on his way rejoicing, and the text says it was the origin of the gospel in Ethiopia, one of the oldest and most persistent Christian movements in the world, started on a desert road by an encounter that neither party had scheduled. Right now in the comments, I am open, not as a magic affirmation, as a declaration of posture. You are signaling that you want to cultivate the anava that makes you available for the encounter when it arrives, and that you are developing the ability to recognize the hine when it appears. Right, I am open. But now I need to address the specific obstacle that causes people with good intentions, with genuine spiritual openness, to still miss their pagash moments without recognizing them. The obstacle is not a lack of openness at the philosophical level. It is closure at the operational level, at the level of daily decisions about where you go, who you talk to, what you discard as irrelevant before giving enough attention to discover what it carries. Granovetter's research on the strength of weak ties identifies a specific mechanism that sociologists call homophily, the human tendency to associate preferentially with people similar to you in terms of context, values, social position, and perspective. Homophily is natural and is not necessarily problematic, but it produces a relational echo chamber effect. You are surrounded by people who already know what you know, who circulate in the same environments you circulate in, who have access to the same information you have access to. Strong ties become a closed circle of high comfort and low surprise. And the transformative encounter, the pagash, rarely comes from within the circle of homophily. It comes from where you were not looking, from someone you would not have selected, from a context that your habitual filter would have marked as irrelevant. This has a direct correspondence in the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 2. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. The Greek word for hospitality here is xenia, which specifically describes hospitality directed toward the xenos, the stranger, the outsider, the one who is not from your group. Xenia is not hospitality for your own. It is the active openness to those who arrive from outside your circle, whom you have no established reason to receive, who have no known credentials, who arrive through a channel that your script was not monitoring. The text of Hebrews is not making a mystical statement about angels in disguise. It is making a deeply practical statement about what you lose when you close the circle only to acquaintances. You also close the channel through which would arrive what acquaintances do not have to give you. The Ethiopian was a xenos to Philip, a stranger from a different culture, from a completely distinct context. Philip ran toward the xenos. He did not calculate social risks. He did not evaluate if the connection had potential return for his own ministry. He did not wait for a formal introduction. He ran, he approached, he asked, "Xenia in action. Turn on the bell now so you don't miss the next episode." Because in the next video, I will go into something that is the natural complement to what we are discussing today. How you sustain anava, the posture of receptive openness, in environments and periods where closure is the natural protective response. Because anava under pressure is different from anava when everything is fine. Turn on the bell. But I need to be completely honest about the other dimension of this pattern, because there is an asymmetry in the encounter that most teachings on connection and providence ignore. Not every unexpected encounter is a pagash. Not every person who arrives from an angle you didn't expect carries what you need. And Xenia without discernment is not spiritual openness. It is naivety that can cost you dearly. The anava that Zacchaeus demonstrated was not an absence of discernment. It was a willingness to receive an encounter that his habitual social filter, wealthy tax collector, position of power, would have probably rejected as inconvenient or unnecessary. The discernment that separated this encounter from others was internal, not external. It was not a prior analysis of who Jesus was before coming down from the tree. It was the quality of the encounter itself, the recognition by name, the clarity of the instruction, the peace that accompanied the descent. Diacrisis, the discernment of precise separation that we discussed in another episode of this series, is not incompatible with xenia. It is what prevents xenia from becoming indiscriminate credulity. You remain open to the xenos, to the stranger, to the unexpected, and at the same time you keep the refined perception system active to distinguish what the encounter carries of reality and of noise. The sign that biblical characters use to recognize the genuine pagash is not emotional intensity, it is internal coherence. The instruction Philip received was specific, clear, without ambiguity. Zacchaeus' descent was accompanied by joy, not by anxiety or pressure. The baptism of the Ethiopian was spontaneous, but the text does not describe coercion. It describes the Ethiopian saying, "Behold, here is water. What hinders me from being baptized?" Hine again. The Ethiopian before the water recognizes the hine. Behold, here it is, this is the moment, and he acts from internal clarity, not from external pressure. This is the marker. The encounter that carries pagash produces at some point in the process a clarity that the nephesh recognizes. It may not be immediate. Zacchaeus came down first and clarity came later. But it arrives, and when it arrives, it has the texture of recognition, not of anxious persuasion. Now for the practical steps, because posture without an implementation structure remains at the level of aspiration. The first step is to audit your exposure map. Where do you habitually go? Who do you talk to on a regular basis? What environments do you frequent consistently? Now the most important question, what is the degree of variation within that map? Do you go to different places, talk to people from contexts different from yours? Expose yourself to perspectives that are not the ones you already have. UFRGS research on serendipity and social networks in the Brazilian context identified that the strongest predictor of exposure to transformative weak ties was not an extroverted personality, it was diversity of exposure contexts. Introverts who deliberately frequented varied environments demonstrated exposure to transformative encounters comparable to extroverts who circulated only in their habitual environments. You don't need to become another person to expand your exposure map. You need to deliberately vary where you go, what events you attend, what invitations you accept that you would normally reject for being outside your relational comfort zone. The second step is to cultivate Xenia as a daily practice. This has immediate concrete application. The stranger next to you on the plane, in the bank line, at the event you didn't expect to attend, the person who was introduced to you casually and whom you would normally discard as an irrelevant connection, the invitation for a conversation that has no obvious fit in your agenda of priorities. Xenia does not require you to accept everything or go everywhere. It requires you to keep the default cost of rejection a little higher than your habitual filter establishes, that you pause before discarding, that you ask the question Philip asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" instead of passing straight by. Often the conversation you almost didn't have goes nowhere. Sometimes it goes exactly where your careful planning could not reach. The third step is to develop the ability to recognize Hine in real time. This is a practice of attention, not of analysis. Hine does not arrive announced with an importance marker. It arrives as an interruption of the ordinary, a conversation that takes a direction you didn't expect, a phrase that sounds with a different weight than the surrounding context, a feeling that something relevant is happening that the rational script of the situation does not completely explain. The practice of attention to Hine involves developing the habit of stopping when something interrupts the ordinary in a way that has no immediate explanation, instead of accelerating to recover the rhythm of what you were doing before. Stop. Give attention to what is happening. Ask the question that deepens instead of discarding it as irrelevant. This consumes time. Sometimes it goes nowhere, and sometimes it is the conversation you will remember years later as the moment when everything changed. The fourth step is to respond with the urgency the moment demands, as Zacchaeus came down quickly and as Philip ran. The encounter that carries Pagash rarely offers a window for prolonged deliberation, not because there is artificial urgency imposed from outside, but because the encounter occurs at a specific moment with a specific configuration of circumstances, and postponement changes the conditions. Zacchaeus could have come down from the tree slowly, calculating social risks before each step. Philip could have walked to the Ethiopian's chariot with more strategic caution. The text records that both responded with urgency, not with impulsivity, but with a response proportional to the clarity of what they were receiving. When you recognize the Hine, the response that honors the recognition has speed, not the speed of anxiety. The speed of one who understands that the moment is open and that openness has a duration. The fifth step is to practice the descent, the surrender of what Anava demands. Zacchaeus came down from the tree. This seems physical and simple, but what the text describes is much more. He descended from a position of distant observation to the level of direct encounter. He left the comfort of the high point where he could see without being completely seen. He entered the vulnerability of the street level, where the encounter happens face to face. What is the sycamore tree you are sitting in? The distant observation point that allows you to monitor without fully exposing yourself.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.